Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com.
Hello, Gamer Nation, and welcome to the Dice Pool Podcast, covering everything that you've ever wanted to know about how to run and play in the Genesis role-playing game by Fantasy Flight Games. I'm your host, GM Hooly, and this episode we have a couple of guests to talk about all things Terrinoth with us. But before we go too deeply into that, let me introduce you to the most devilishly handsome group of co-hosts, my friends GM Huzz, GM Flano, and GM Kaitlin, who's returning again after being unwell last time. How are we all?
Yeah.
Well,
Much better.
Much better? Very good.
Well, you know, these devilishly handsome looks of mine, it gets tiring.
I see.
But I am doing well.
Constant maintenance.
It is. Hours in the mirror every morning.
Wow.
This beard doesn't do itself.
No. You've really got to look after the beard. You know, all those oils and, you know, grooming.
Love,
Wow.
care.
Jeez. So, what's everybody been up to?
Beard care.
other than beard care?
There's not much else other than that.
Clearly not. Michael?
What have I been up to? Lots of gaming, I guess. Well, actually not a whole lot of gaming. It's been pretty sparse.
Well, I mean, I got you back into MechWarrior Online.
MechWarrior Online, yep, unfortunately.
Is that because of the weights? Or?
No, well, we discovered to circumnavigate the waiting, you can't group up as a party. You have to group up singly, then launch the game at the same time. And pray, you get into the same match, and then pray, you end up in the same team. So it's
Well,
ahead of its time when it comes to matchmaking.
90% of the time we end up in the same game. Just about 50% of the time we're on the same side.
I don't think it's 50% of the time, even though it should be. But yeah, playing a lot of MechWarrior Online recently. Keyforge, been playing that, which is great. I know GM Flano had his first game of it last night.
Yep.
A couple of games.
It's amazing, can I just say.
Yeah.
And I've only had one game. I want to play more.
All my
Well, I mean, what are you doing?
all my cards are right here, just saying.
Well.
Well, we RPG like we haven't, have we?
We've done some L5R.
We did do L5R, yes.
We're talking about me here, and I haven't L5R.
That's right.
Oh, that's right, because you were busy doing other stuff.
I was busy doing other things, beard care.
He couldn't come. He was washing his hair that night.
Oh, dear.
No. I was me and my mate Josh have been working hard at developing video games. So we had our first prize invite playtest. Where we had NDAs and everything done up. That's how official it's sort of getting.
How did that go?
Yeah, that's basically been ongoing. But we had to get a heap of things ready for that weekend.
Yep.
So that's why I was off that Friday night, because work plus that just meant no time. Plus I was sick, so it didn't help either. But that's okay.
Excuses.
I know, and I'm full of it.
Being sick is no excuse.
I know. I just keep on just die.
Yeah, remember that for next time, Kat.
Oh, rip.
No, you should just die. I mean, because then a
Wow.
because we're talking about
Whoa, you
Terrinoth
don't
here,
even need
and
to finish that sentence.
and there are necromancers. Necromancers are just really late healers.
Right. I've never heard of it referred to as that. That's amazing. Wow. They're also recyclers.
Yeah.
That's just saying. Very environmentally friendly.
But yeah,
Moving on from that.
that's basically me.
Cool. Martin, what have you been up to?
Other than telling my friends to go die.
That's a lie. You haven't got any friends.
Oh, he does it now.
Ow.
Ow.
Oh, it's even worse now.
Well, yeah, we played some L5R, Legend of the Five Rings, which is amazing. We got to advance the plot a bit in that and enjoy some of the social combat aspects, which is something that I would love to see implemented in the Genesis setting, because that's got its own social mechanics.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we can absolutely apply some of the things we learnt from that across systems.
Always learning.
Absolutely. And MechWarrior Online. Enjoying
and BattleTech again.
BattleTech. The new expansion for BattleTech came out, and I mean that's most of what I've been doing, apart from beard care.
Well, you do both at the same time because it is turn-based.
Yeah, it is.
So when the enemy's having his turn,
you get up and you
have your beard care.
Yeah.
Wow.
Martin has. I've seen Martin's computer set up. He's actually got both his monitors to left and right, and then to the middle. That's how weird and vain he is. The mirror is actually dead center. So he has to turn to look at the PC monitor. But dead center is Beard Care Station number 1.
Wow. So look out for the new setting, Beards of Terrinoth, coming out soon.
Can we rename that?
That's too late. It's recorded. We're running out of tape. So...
Oh, dear. So, Kaitlin, what have you been up to?
I wish I was doing more gaming. My life doesn't feel the same without doing it as often as I was used to doing, playing RPGs with you guys after moving.
Yep.
But, yeah, pretty much my world has been working, preparing for the holidays. I have not had a cold Christmas before or a white Christmas, which I'm hoping to do so when we're traveling to Kansas over the Christmas period. So I'm hoping to see some snow. And basically getting prepared for that because I don't have any clothing or anything that is probably thermally efficient enough from Australia to handle what is currently happening in Kansas, which is a blizzard. So that'll be exciting. I'll probably be not a few toes less when I come back, I'm thinking.
Because our winters here in Australia, as for those who don't know, our winters, yeah, I know, it lasts for about maybe a week.
No. Last year it was a Tuesday, I'm sure.
Well, no. In Australia, you can literally start watching a movie at the start of winter.
Right.
And by the time the credits roll, you're already out of winter.
And it doesn't even need to be an extended edition.
No.
Well, it's entirely accurate, and I'm going to be going somewhere where there's going to actually be snow. Well, fingers crossed there's going to be snow. I'm really excited to see it. And I know a lot of people who probably are in the States who have been living in snow for the past while is like, how could you possibly be excited for that? But seeing as though, as we just mentioned, winter is only a couple of hours in Australia, I'm excited for it.
Yeah.
Plus, I had a whole year of summer moving over here, so I'm actually really excited to experience some cold weather. Because you guys are now having summer right now, so I'm happy to be out of there.
But yes, the last time that I travelled around, I went to England during winter, and everybody looked at us strangely every time we mentioned, "Oh, it's going to snow soon," and we all got this big gleeful, like smile, and they're just scowling.
And they would be like wearing maybe like thin shirts and like jeans or something like that. Meanwhile, you're all like rugged up because that's what I've had to get. Like I've had to buy a proper snow jacket, like proper shoes that are actually waterproof because I only had thongs or flip-flops for anyone listening in the States.
Yep.
And I was like, I probably actually need to get something that is not going to give me frostbite when I leave the house for a couple of minutes.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's pretty much what my world's been like. See, I need more gaming. I'm being hit with too much reality. I'm not dealing well with it.
Have you been doing much of your Dark Heresy Genesis?
Not for a couple of weeks because we've been
busy,
conflict schedules and whatnot. But we're hoping to kick off again next weekend.
Cool.
That should put us back on the old rotation. So it should be session 3 all going well. So
nice.
I am so excited.
We've been pretty keen too. So. Be good.
Very good. Well, as far as what I've been up to, I've taken on another project for FFG, which I can't talk about. Oh, well, that's the end of that story.
Cool story.
Cool story.
Wow. Tell me more.
Well, just to give you an indication that FFG is doing a lot of stuff in the background that people don't know about.
Well, they always are. They've got to be.
That's exactly right. So, for those people that are saying, we haven't got this coming out, well, watch this space is all I'm saying.
Check the website.
Because I know that I'm as busy as hell. But anyway, also played some D&D, which I didn't mention last time because, it's
I think you
5th
did,
edition.
actually.
Did I?
Yeah, we all groaned.
But 5th edition. It's interesting. It's I've decided that it doesn't matter what system it is. It's going to be dependent on your players. It's not exactly what I like in an RPG.
It's not the narrative experience you're hoping for.
No. And I mean, I get
personal
that
preference,
with, yeah, I understand. And I get that with L5R and with Genesis. So, and Star Wars as well. So, but yeah, each to their own, but it's good fun anyway. It's still gaming, as Michael mentioned.
Well,
so.
even if you don't get that narrative experience, it's good fun to hang out with your friends and do that sort of thing. So
exactly.
It's always an excuse just to be there and be social.
And talk and pun and whatever else. So it's all good fun.
Yeah, it's all good fun.
L5R and some Star Wars. We played Star Wars a couple of weekends ago.
After last recording.
That was an amazing episode.
We should be playing Star Wars today, just saying, but we're not, because our GM pulled the pin.
Oh, our GM pulled the pin because the GM was doing lots and lots of work. But anyway, it's all good.
It's all right. Just go home and cry.
That's how you care for your beard.
Exactly.
Wow.
The tears.
Well, you ever wonder why, you see a surfer and their hair is always like nice and dry, like bleached dry? It's because it's all the salty seawater. Salty tears does the same for the beard.
It does.
Right.
It's the best way for it. It's even better when you guys like share the tears.
Yep.
It's a beautiful bonding experience.
It is. It brings two people closer.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
All right,
It's
so
beautiful.
listeners,
It's really magical.
let's move it along.
New segment for the show.
Right.
Beard care. Beard care.
And then my part will come in, which will be beard decoration, because
Yes.
I have been begging Michael and Martin to let me give them glitter beads since
You
like
keep
probably
on.
5
I
minutes
keep
after I
on
met
saying
you.
yes, do it, and then we don't get any glitter for our beards. So
I have purchased beard fairy lights, beard Christmas decorations. It's happening. It's happening.
Wow.
I'll wear those decorations.
It's gonna be magical.
You know I will. I'll wear them wherever.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
So, well, you probably
Guess what?
What?
Gamer Nation Con.
I'll-
Yes.
I've got I'll do it.
So, yeah, speaking of Gamer Nation Con, D20 Radio's Gamer Nation Con, the best little but big international gaming convention on the planet, being held in plain old Texas, or its real name, plain O, Texas.
It's plain old. I looked it up in the dictionary.
Right? Sorry for our Texas listeners. And this is coming on the...
Don't apologise for their mistakes. Okay? Let them own it.
So this will be coming the 4th to the 7th of April 2019, as opposed to what I said last time, which was 2018.
Well, it happened in 2018.
It did,
So
but
it's
it
just-
wasn't on those dates.
Yeah, well.
But anyway, so and it's certainly worth mentioning that we'll be there in all of our glory and glitter, apparently.
Oh yes, so much glitter.
So don't say we didn't give you fair warning. Tickets have all but sold out, but those who are going, we will definitely be seeing you there.
And if you haven't got a ticket, then I guess...
You're not one of the cool kids.
No, I guess you don't go.
Wow. That's all right. There's always next year, and there will definitely be one for next year.
Well, that is next year's.
Oh, sorry. The year after. 2020. Wow.
That's even worse. There's always next year, but you can't go to that one either.
We're just being mean all round tonight. What is this? We're mean girls.
Vicious.
Well,
Mean Girls.
The Mean Girls podcast. There you go. That's
Does
a new
this
thing
go
for
with
it.
our beards of Terrinoth?
No, it's Mean Girls Beard Care. That's going to be the new brand. that we're
Right.
gonna put together.
Very good. Excellent. So I reckon, you know what we should do? We should actually get onto this podcast and get on to tonight's... Yes, I know.
Podcast.
What is this thing? Oh my God, I'm speaking into a microphone. What is that all about? So should we get into tonight's topic, which is full of magic and fantasy?
don't you mean beard care?
What? I don't even know anymore.
Yeah, it's called Core of the Show.
Hey.
Well, sport.
I know somebody's up to date with it.
Core of the show.
And welcome to Core of the Show, the segment where we will take a deep dive into a topic concerning the Genesis role-playing game and, of course, gaming in general. Now, tonight, as a special treat for listeners, we are going to do a follow-up on last week's episode, talking all things Terrinoth. Now, in our last episode, we went over our thoughts on Realms of Terrinoth, the first setting book for Genesis, giving our personal takes on the book and how you can use it in your games. Now, we've had a few questions, and we know you did as well. So we thought we'd go to the source at Fantasy Flight Games to get some answers. Consequently, FFG has sent us the big guns to answer our games and rules questions about this fantastic book. In fact, they sent not one, but two Tims to tackle our queries, both of whom were instrumental in this book's development. So without further ado, let us introduce you to the show to talk about everything Realms of Terrinoth, product developers Tim Cox and Tim Hucklebery. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Hello. Yes, thanks for having us.
That's quite all right. It's always a pleasure to have new guests on the show. So let's get this on the road and get stuck into a heap of listener questions.
Sure thing.
Cool.
But we should firstly mention that as much as we'd love to know what awesome things might be just over the horizon, FFG does have a long-standing policy on questions like this. So if you've asked about future releases, we are sorry to say that FFG cannot comment on any future unannounced products, other than to watch the FFG website for details. Now, that's not us being an old funny-duddy. That's just the way FFG go. You can blame the Tims for that. They were instrumental behind that decision.
No, I'm pretty sure it was Sam.
That saves us some time.
Because, yeah, obviously a lot of people want to know exactly what's going on in the world of FFG in the future. But, you just have to wait, like we all do.
Because we did get a few questions, people asking about future products. Unfortunately, it's the way it goes. Tough stuff.
Indeed.
Yes, keep an eye on the website.
where we spend most of our time anyway, just waiting for those updates.
Yeah, pretty much.
So, Tim and Tim, are you ready to get stuck into these questions?
You bet.
Absolutely.
All right, so our first question to both of you, which is a nice little opener, is who each of you are and what do you do? So we'll start with Tim Cox.
Well, I'm Tim Cox, as you stated. I am an RPG developer at FFG. For several years before I joined the company full-time, I was a freelancer as well, working on their various role-playing game lines.
Hi, yes, Tim Hucklebery. I've been with FFG for, I think, 8 years at this point. Before that, I was with Games Workshop, and I'm also a RPG producer.
Cool.
I guess you'll be in there next because you're a freelancer, right, Ian? That's you're progressing to the office next. Long distance travelled every day, but you got this.
They just need to invent teleporters.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, pretty much. I don't know how we're going to interview me, though. But anyway, that's a side note. Moving along.
All right. So how did each of you get into gaming, and what got you into RPGs in the first place?
Well, I guess we can go in alphabetical order.
Or you can fight it out, on a tightrope over lava.
Yeah, pretty much.
It's our favourite way of solving disputes.
I think I've been interested in gaming in some form, pretty much as long as I can remember. It probably began with video games before I discovered tabletop games. I discovered RPGs I believe it was in the 6th grade, and a friend suggested playing a game during lunch that he had actually developed himself. So it was that was my first taste of it, and then I discovered that there were actual books I could buy to play games like that, and that's when I started scouring used bookstores for old D&D books.
That's actually very similar to how I got into the games. Yeah.
I would imagine a lot of people, their introduction is through a friend.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. We designed our own game in the lunch hours. Yeah.
That's fantastic.
So, Huck, what about you?
For me, it was mostly college, and then when I got into the Air Force, there were several groups playing as well, lots of board games and role-play game groups with us and civilian contractors, actually. And that's where I really got into playing role-play games big time, with various groups on different shifts the place I worked.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah, it does.
If only I had a workplace like that, that'd be great.
Well, you could just start.
I could, but then nobody would get their calls answered.
Well, no, you got lunch breaks, haven't you?
Well, I do.
Well,
I
what's
do.
your excuse?
Just include all of your callers. They could be random NPCs.
That would be amazing. If I actually ever called someone for support, like an IT support or anything like that, I would love for them to be like, okay, roll initiative.
Yes.
No. Instead of a hold time, you get dumped into a group queue, and you can all talk to each other, and you just run a D&D session, drop in, drop out. It'd be beautiful. I would do that.
There you go.
But you work at Police Link. You're going to get some all sorts of players dropping in out of that.
Some crazy people.
Help, I'm being stabbed.
People that have nothing better to do and just call into game. Like, that's what that would be me.
Right. Anyway.
We've got a question here. What was the first product you were involved in as a writer, freelancer, or developer? I will start with you, Tim Cox.
Well, that would be the Tome of Fate for Black Crusade. That was my first product as a freelance RPG writer, and that was a book Huck was developing. So he actually gave me my first job in the industry.
Wow.
Yeah, it was actually really cool because we had a submission call, and we sort of divvied up going through all of us here, like, hey, this one looks pretty good. We should try this out. So I read Tim's. It's like, yeah, this stuff looks pretty nice. I'll try them out on the next book I'm doing. And haven't looked back. I mean, I think you wrote for pretty much every project I did after that. I tried to get you on everything I did. And it was great. I mean, he did a fantastic job, and delighted to get him on board here.
There you go. There's some high praise for you.
That's a great experience.
And what about you, Huck?
It probably was back when I was with Games Workshop. I wrote for or worked with on some of the Minis projects and the Black Library products. And that led to writing for the original Dark Heresy.
Okay.
Ooh.
Was that the one by Black Industries?
Right. It's kind of a sad story because we always tell people, you want to write and impress people. Well, I just happened to be talking to the right person at the right time. I was the brand manager in the U.S. for Black Library and was over in England talking with Mark Ascone, the head of Black Library at the time, and we were talking about just weapon stats, and wouldn't it be cool if we did a weapons book that was more just fluff rather than just stats for the minis game? He said, well, actually, we're going to be doing a role-play game. How'd you like to write the weapons section? And it went from there.
Wow.
Yeah, I remember that.
That's really cool.
I remember that got released. I was super keen for it because I was a massive 40k fan back then, and I still am. And it got released, and you couldn't find a copy in Australia at all. And
Really?
Nah, not at all.
This is so quick.
Yeah, and I picked it up from the States, and I think I paid as much in postage as I did for the book itself.
Wow.
But it's it sits on my shelf quite proud. It's probably my most used RPG books, that Black Industries Dark Heresy book. So I have that one with the Black Industries logo on it. So it's a bit of a collector's piece, I like to think.
Collector's items, yes.
Yeah. Because it's got
My Black Industries copy started to disintegrate after so much use. So it's still holding together, though.
Yep. It's classic.
Okay, next question. If you could play or run any setting using the Genesis RPG, what would it be? Starting off with Tim Cox.
It's always a good question because it's obviously there's so many possibilities, and my answer would probably change from week to week or day to day. I think one thing I'd like to explore with it is a very sort of gonzo out there space fantasy in the style of films of the 70s and 80s. Just sort of throw all the tropes together and leave it very open to the players to work together to develop the galaxy as well, and just see where that goes.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds cool.
I'm picturing a very VHS style future, where everything's big and chunky. And,
Oh yes, everything is very, very retro, future sort of thing.
Amazing.
Very Buck Rogers.
Digital analog. That's what it is.
Yeah, no smartphones or anything like that. Everything's big and clunky.
That'd be the best.
That sounds amazing. And what about you, Tim, number 2?
Oh no!
Actually,
Sorry.
one-shot superheroes game a while back. Basically fleshing out the little fiction bit that starts the superhero tone off, and had a lot of fun doing that. I wouldn't mind doing more of those. I thought that was just had a blast doing it, and Tim was in on that too.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. We saved the world, I think, and the moon.
Yeah, barely saved the world.
That's awesome.
Because that superhero tone is just amazing. I'm yet to sort of get it on the table, but I've been talking about doing Marvel superheroes for a while, like the equivalent thereof, and just sort of like doing up my own little setting. Well, I think that'd be great, but yes.
Well, I think FFG need to release a superhero setting book.
Right, get on to that.
Just saying.
You heard it here first. No, I'm just kidding. So, what do both of you run as your home games?
I'll go first this time, actually.
Yes, please, go ahead.
Actually, for my home games, usually with just family involved, we play actually really retro card games like Euchre.
Wow.
Which I don't know. Yeah. It's a fast-paced trick-taking game, not like a collectible game at all. Just regular card decks. Rather boring, but a lot of fun.
Not boring at all. I love old card games. They're a lot of fun.
But Huck, do you also run RPGs at home as well, or?
Not at home so much. Generally, I like running stuff, gathering people at the office.
Yep.
Just because we're all kind of here and we know where it is, and it's easy to coordinate things.
Yeah. I'd love to know how long your lunch hours are.
Oh, after work. Although at any given time during lunch, there's generally one session somebody's running in our lunch area.
Yep.
Either homebrew or D&D or something, as well as just all sorts of other games as well. But yeah, it's generally on a given day someone's running some sort of role-play game.
Cool.
And whereabouts do you submit your job applications? I'm sorry, that's not one of the questions. That's just one I threw in there. But I think everyone's asking.
That's also on our website.
Excuse me, I'm going to be out for the rest of the episode.
And Tim Cox, what sort of games do you run as your home games?
I try to run a variety of games. I am currently running a Star Wars RPG game for some friends, most of whom did not have any experience with the narrative dice system. So I told them, well, you have to try it. So here,
wow.
Let's play some Star Wars.
And how did they find it?
Everyone's really enjoying it. They're really loving all the opportunities the dice have opened up. In our last game, one of the characters convinced an ancient droid that he was its long lost master and had just changed their appearance, and they got a triumph. So
nice.
It hopefully works out with some threat complicated things, and I think that really sold them on the game.
Very good.
On a quick aside, we were discussing this the other day. This is a pretty good question for the Tims. The narrative dice system, do you think it's a system that's better suited to be introduced to people from someone who knows how to play it? Because we run into a few groups of people who have never played it before. And so they sort of try and learn it themselves, and they sort of miss the point of it, and they sort of get frustrated by it. Do you think that's a sort of a fair point to make?
Well, in my experience, the majority of RPGs, I think, are at least easier to learn if you're introduced by someone. And I think because it's such a collaborative experience, if you go into it with someone who knows how to play, that eases the learning process. I don't know that the narrative dice system is any more difficult to learn than other games, unless perhaps they're coming at it with expectations of a more traditional sort of system with less of a narrative approach.
Yeah, I think I have to echo that based on like running demos, and because generally the first thing you do is ask, so who's played, who's familiar, who's not, where what's your experience level, so you know how to where to step into the demo for what level. And I think sometimes people who have just never played a role play game before are playing this because they like the setting and want to see what this was like. Sometimes they'll pick up the dice system a little faster just because they're not sort of struggling against what they preconceived notions of what a role play game system is supposed to be like. And the symbols are just kind of fun once you get into it.
I think it's what we found. The people that pick up this game the most are the people who've never played an RPG before. Because they haven't got that, they're not...
That preconceived idea of what it's supposed to be like. Yeah.
And they're also more open to, okay, we just rolled the dice, and you succeeded, but other things happen now. Oh, cool. Let's go with that. And after a couple of dice rolls, they're expecting to start telling the story that way.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Very, very good.
All right, so Tim's, give us your favourite RPG moment. Start with you, Mr. Huckleberry.
That's a good one. I was going to go with one earlier that's my typical answer, but I got to say, thinking about this in particular, when we had a little playtest campaign for Terrinoth here, and Tim probably remembers this too. So there's a third Tim as well, who decided to embrace necromancy. And kept it rather good secret. And it was just as we were going along and we were like, defeating people. And so the bodies are upstairs and we go back up. The bodies aren't there anymore. I wonder what happened. My gosh, they've been taken away. Who would have a reason to gather dead bodies? And yeah, it was a hoot. It was a lot of fun.
We had a question from the listener last episode regarding how do you keep necromancy a secret. So that's a bit of inside to us.
It was great. Of course, we as players knew what was going on, but our characters had no idea.
Yeah,
That's the best part.
It was a lot of fun.
Cool.
We were playtesting the Haunted City adventure, and so having a necromancer in the party made things very interesting.
Wow. That's cool.
Nice.
So what about you, Tim Cox? What was your favourite RPG moment?
Honestly, I don't think I could pick one. I was actually just thinking about that same campaign since we're thinking about Terrinoth, so I stole my answer there. But one very memorable moment, I'll say, is another time I was introducing a friend to Dark Heresy. Just after Dark Heresy 2nd Edition came out, it was basically a new player joined our group, and we'd all been playing 40k role-playing for a while, but this guy wasn't very familiar with the 40k setting at all and hadn't played the game yet. And the very first combat encounter of the campaign, their characters were ambushed by some cultists, and due to some lucky rolls on my part, in the first round, the surprise round of combat, the new player's character had his leg shot off. And he was a melee fighter, so he then had to proceed to try to crawl around the battlefield to fight. And that really stuck with me as a very memorable, darkly humorous moment, and just a great introduction to Grimdark that game is.
Yep.
That sounds like Dark Heresy. I remember I was running a game with Dark Heresy a while ago, and like the first scene of the game was one of the players like in a gladiatorial pit fight, and in the first fight she was like a big berserker type, so she should have done really, really well, and she did eventually. But in that one fight with the first like 5 minutes of campaign, she lost her nose and one of her arms.
Right.
And so immediately that player was like, well, I have to go get some cybernetics now.
Wow.
What a shame.
Just that brutality the Dark Heresy could bring is amazing.
The cyber nose.
It's great for a new player to find that out right off the bat, right? And that way they know what they're getting into if they come back for the next session.
It really sets those expectations.
Exactly.
All right, so we've learned a little about. I'll try that again. We've learned a little bit about both of you. So let's talk about the work on the book itself. Now, Kyle Quigley came up with a question, which is, what was the most challenging, stressful part of the project for each of you? What kept you up at night until you finally solved the problem?
For me, I'm not sure anything kept me up at night, and this is kind of a statement that really goes for most books, especially brand new. I mean, this was a first of its kind. Is what's going to go where? How many pages should we devote to certain sections? And we only have so many pages to work with, so what isn't going to go in a book possibly? And just staring at that big empty spreadsheet with a page planner, trying to figure out how much do we need to devote to this? And that was a lot working with Katrina Ostrander, who's now Katrina Lee, who is the third big part of this book, trying to decide, how much pages do we need to devote to explaining this setting? and this, which everything in there, it's resources you're eating up whenever you say, well, we really need to talk about this, but that means we're not going to talk too much about something else possibly. So it's a finite resources setting for what goes into a book. And sadly, a lot of the questions we get about, well, why did you do blank? Well, because we only had so many pages, and something had to get big and something had to get small.
And I think that's across the board for a lot of books, just generally, when people say that something isn't in there that should be in there in their opinion. Well, it's like...
And we probably agree with them. I mean, yeah you're right. In the world, that would be in the book, too.
Yep.
There's so much more, even especially for this one. Terrinoth is such a huge setting for anybody who's played Descent or the other Runebound games. They know there's lots of other stuff that could have been in the book.
Yep. Just leaves the door open for future stuff, which we can't talk about. But
Check website.
Check website.
We make a little soundbite. We can just press a button and just insert that.
Yes, absolutely. So, Tim Cox, what about you? What did you find the most challenging?
I guess the most challenging part for me was working on heroic abilities and getting those where we all wanted them, since that was a new rules feature over the Genesis core book that required an extra level of attention, and it went through a lot of development and permutations before we had something we were happy with.
I think it turned out really well, so good job.
Yeah, it's well, I think it's one of my favorite sections in that book because it is something so unique and new that you can bring to any other system. Yep. So it's like an attachment to the Genesis core book in a way, which is cool.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's definitely something that can be used outside of Terrinoth or even outside of a fantasy campaign.
And I suppose having such a larger size book up your sleeve for Terrinoth, like compared to other supplement books, must have been somewhat liberating, I guess, because you had a few more pages to work with.
Yes, that felt really good. But again, it feels really good until you get to the point where you're running out of pages. That page count disappears awfully quick.
Yeah. Because how many writers were actually involved in this book in the first place? Is it...
2, 3, 4... We have 5, and then Tim and I and Kat wrote stuff, and I think Sam Stewart also pitched in some words. I mean, one thing, especially on our side, obviously we have freelancers, but then we sort of divvy up a lot of stuff here internally. People just want to pitch in and write some bits because you're working on a project that's interesting to them. Everyone's pretty welcome internally just to, I'd really like to write this bit. It's kind of cool. Yeah, sure. So we had quite a group on this. It was a lot of fun.
That's cool. All right, so I guess... I know it's interesting. On such a big project, and you say you filled up the page space so quickly. Did anyone have a writer's block? I guess you could say. Like, was there any challenge to knowing what to add to make it an interesting RPG book? Like, was there any hurdles in that sort of regard?
Tim, you want to take this one first?
I don't think coming up with ideas for content include was ever really a problem. Like I said, there was so much to work with already, not to mention new ideas we wanted to develop that we were never stuck in that regard, at least.
Yeah, I think the closest thing for me would be just certain sections we put aside to write. Craig Glant did a lot of the fiction. There were a couple of the bits we just sort of needed to plug in. So the spreadsheet sort of said, 4 pages about adventure in the Rue, and Tim will write this. And then at some point later on, it's like, oh, I need to write that part, don't I? And coming up with fiction, I love writing little fiction bits, a short fiction, but coming up with a cool idea just to launch it sometimes will take a while. But, generally, once we get an idea, everybody's like, yeah, that sounds like a cool idea for a little fiction bit, especially working with Katrina on those. They generally would come up pretty good, but just coming up with the idea for them is usually the tough part.
Yeah. It is a fantastic book, though, guys. That I mean, that the sense that everything would have had to have been spread out so much with, all the different board games and card games and everything else.
Yeah, that was actually a big challenge. Luckily, we've got a story group of people here whose job is to sort of like be the stewards of the intellectual property. And they did a lot of work gathering up stuff from all the different sources for Runebound and Terrinoth and Legacy of Dragonhold and Descent and all the other games for this setting that we could work with, and that we expanded in this book itself, obviously, as well.
Well, we've, asked a few things about yourselves and your work on the book. We love to talk about the artwork in these books. So I can see here...
The artwork in our books is fantastic.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So was there a lot of artwork that needed to be generated for Terrinoth, or is there a lot of pieces that have been used from elsewhere?
We did use existing art because there's so much fantastic existing art, but we actually commissioned a lot of new art as well. And that was really a fun part of it, too, was sort of bringing things to life that maybe had never been shown before, or just brand new things that had never appeared in the Runebound setting, and showing those on pages for the first time. So that was a blast.
Yeah, there's some awesome stuff in that book. I love going through it. I think I've looked at the pictures more than I've read anything.
Well, and I was going to say, it's the first thing I do. As soon as I pick up an FFG book, I will do what I do when I was a 5-year-old and just go through and look at all the pictures, and I'll tend to find stuff. And we'll be going through it, and I'll be like, oh, look at this one on this page, and things like that. It's one of my favorite parts of these books.
And it inspires you.
And just quietly, I can't read.
Why are you doing it this podcast then?
I'm not reading anything.
Yeah, we're just talking.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people do the same thing. I've definitely flipped through a book to see all the art when I first pick it up as well. It's always fun.
Well, speaking of then, what are your favorite pieces of artwork for the book?
Huck, do you have any favorites?
I do. Actually, I listening to the last podcast, I definitely agree. The spread on pages 22 and 23 that open up the first chapter, and all the stained glass art in particular, I thought was just fantastic. And that was David Griffith. He did also some pieces for Legacy of Dragonhold.
Right.
That I just really loved, and Katrina and I thought it would be a great style to use to sort of bring the history to life for a bit. And that, and I guess they also just the little sketches for the fiction that Michael Rooker did. Again, were fantastic.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the stained glass style art, as well as all the art spreads in that introduction section. I found those very atmospheric and evocative, and definitely inspire me to want to run a game.
They're like little windows into the world that that you want to play in.
Yeah, it's very cool. I know when I picked this book up, I wasn't expecting it to be so nicely laid out of artwork, and I think that's because I was so used to flipping through the Genesis core rulebook, which is very, very stark, deliberately so.
Yeah.
And when I got this book, I cracked it open. I'm like, wow, this is mind-blowing how nicely presented this is. And it makes me super excited for future books. And I just can't wait to get my hands on that Shadows of the Beanstalk, because that's going to look amazing. Using all that Netrunner artwork assets, it's going to be fantastic.
No pressure.
I got to say quick shout-outs to the art director on the book, Taylor Grosson, did a fantastic job. And also our graphic designers, Dwayne Nichols and Evan Simonet, to make this book look kind of old in a good way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of had you feel like the pages should be thicker than they are.
Yep. That's unusual, because I thought they were. There you go. Wow. There you go. Because just even the background sort of the page, the parchment sort of look with with the older style etchings, and it does look like that you're picking up a tome. Of like a magic tome or some old piece of lore. Absolutely beautiful book.
You know what? I'm going to throw this out there because I'm a bit of a bad boy. But I think it'll be awesome in future books. Those little ribbon bookmark things in the books. Those in every RPG book should have those ribbons. At least 1, 2 ideally. Just saying.
One of my favorite books that I ever got, I won as a prize at a convention, and it was a D&D 3.5 player's guide.
Yep.
Is it the leather-bound one?
It is a leather-bound
nice,
one
nice.
with those ribbons.
Yeah.
I love it.
It says ribbons that do it. They're amazing.
But yeah, I'm just going to make mention very quickly because, there are things that like you skip past and then all of a sudden, and I'm just looking at the book at the moment and there's a page which is under magic is precious, just based on what you'd said, Tim, before, that, the whole of the bottom of the page is just a piece of artwork. And just this one image of, the mage basically sitting there writing in his tome. With these large sort of golems, obviously rune golems of some sort, sort of monitoring his progress. Mm-hmm. Geez, that makes me want to write a story.
No. He's doing their homework.
He's doing their homework. Better
finish that homework there, nerd.
Oh, dear. All right.
Yeah, that's a fantastic.
So moving away from artwork, let's talk about the setting generally. And we've got a lot of questions, so if we don't get to them all, listeners, we do apologise, but no doubt we'll see if we can get some answers from the guys to the ones that we don't get through. But this question has come from Theo, and he says, was wondering where the Terrinoth developers take inspiration from when putting this setting together. As in favourite fantasy literature, Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, Shannara, or Pryden? What is that?
Don't know.
There you go. I feel ignorant now.
Yep.
Or fantasy settings played in places like Greyhawk, Faerun, and things like that?
I think nowadays most of it's really drawn from the Terrinoth setting itself because it's had so many years and it's developed its own sort of rich history that a lot of it comes from just, okay, well, this is what's going on. These are the things. This is the setting. These are the peoples. Where does it go next? What else can we do? What would this other new thing look like? That, probably a long time ago, that may have been a different answer than now. But now, I just say now, it's probably a lot of it just comes internally. Again, we've got a great story group. Kara and Dan do a fantastic job. Sort of like, what can we do next with this setting?
I know, at least for me, and I imagine maybe at least some of the others as well, but I've just been exposed to so much and absorbed so much fantasy over the years that I think there's often not necessarily a conscious recognition of where all these inspirations might be coming from. You just sort of draw from everything to some extent, even if it's a very small one.
Because it kind of almost blends all together, and then it just generates ideas, as you say, subconsciously of where you want something to go. Just as a query, I know that this isn't sort of one of the questions, but what was do you guys know what was the first sort of book or game or board game that was in that rune-bound setting that FFG released?
That's a good question. I'm wondering if it might have been Descent First Edition.
Okay.
I don't know. That's a really good question. We have to do some research there.
I want to say it was Runebound First Edition.
Yeah.
The board game, yeah. Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
There you go. Just as a bit of trivia. Just interested in that.
Oh, that's a good one.
It's funny. We picked up, years and years ago, we picked up Runebound, the board game.
Yep.
It's funny how it's gone full circle, and like 10 years later, I'm sitting here doing a podcast on the setting. I don't know.
Awesome.
Interesting. All right, so the next question comes from a friend of the show, Kyle Quigley, and he asks, what was the most challenging aspect of designing the different elements in a way that was true to the setting, while also allowing people the freedom to use them in their own unique fantasy settings?
That's a good question. Well, I'll jump in and say for me that would probably be my involvement in the magic rules because obviously Terrinoth has a unique approach to magic with the importance of the runebound shards. So capturing that in the Genesis rules, keeping it compatible with the existing magic rules, and also keeping it flexible enough that people can use some of that content in their homegrown fantasy games, all came together to drive that process. And so that was a lot of challenges to address.
Yeah, I think that has to be along the same lines. I mean, we wanted to, obviously, this book is about Terrinoth, but we also want to make it something that people could use for, and adopt for other fantasy settings of their own, without blanding up too much of what makes Terrinoth so unique and special. So that was, overall, I'd say that was just a thing throughout the entire book.
Was that a design choice to have it so that Terrinoth would be more accessible if people didn't want to necessarily run it in Terrinoth, but that they can use some of the setting and some of the rules from that in their own games?
You bet. Genesis, at the end of the day, is a toolbox.
Yep.
So we wanted to offer not only this is a nice source book for Terrinoth, but also a collection of tools that people can use for their own fantasy or other settings as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I definitely want people to feel that they could approach it that way, and that they might take certain parts that they liked for their own game and their own campaign, without necessarily taking all the new content and all the new rules. But of course, also making sure it was a cohesive campaign setting for Terrinoth.
Because that's certainly the way that the community has grabbed hold of it. So if that was the design goal, well done. That worked.
Great. Yeah, I'm glad people are using it that way.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And I think there's a gift that's going to keep on giving as well as time goes on with each new setting book that comes out, and people are going to truly start realizing that because of Genesis and narrative dice all using one system, and how much you can just start borrowing and making your own stuff from all these other setting books that come out. It's just going to get more and more amazing as time goes on by. It's going to be great. I'm looking forward to it.
Because we've already talked about that with Terrinoth, and then when Shadow of the Beanstalk come out, you can basically run your Shadowrun setting if you want to using Genesis. So, or any of that sort of fantasy mixed in with sci-fi.
And then when the third book eventually comes out, whatever that might be, then there's potentially another crazy combo. It's great. It's fantastic.
One day, just going to get them all and play them all in the one setting.
Explode.
Yep.
That would be interesting.
All right. So I think we should talk a little bit about the species, the archetypes in this book of ours. So Richard Buxton has asked, what species were your favorite to create? Was the Descent game detailed enough to make the design obvious? Or did you get some free reign to make new ideas come to life?
We actually, there was obviously a lot of stuff coming in from Descent, especially Legacy of Dragonhold, for species to hit. But we still had the freedom to do some new stuff. I particularly enjoyed the Sunderland's Orc. Because orcs with alchemy sounds awesome.
Yes.
I love the orcs in Terrinoth. I just think that they're so different than what we've sort of seen elsewhere.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, we've still got elements that, like your WoW orcs and things like that. But just the one that got me was in the Gen Con module that we did for the live play. The orc who was sitting in the corner writing poetry. That was just gold.
I still love the orc that we created that was a fashion designer.
Sure. Orcs can do anything they put their minds to in Terrinoth, including writing poetry, fashion design. But I personally really enjoyed developing gnomes. I always enjoyed those sorts of characters in RPGs.
Which I mean, I think we've asked this question later on down the track, but I mean, I've got a bit of a soft spot for halflings in games. And I was talking to someone because I thought, well, where are the halflings? There's only gnomes. And it was pointed out to me by Richard Buxton that, take a look at them a little bit more closely and to go, oh, they really are just halflings, aren't they? So if anybody's out there that's sort of going, well, where are the halflings like I did? Well, they're there. Just open your eyes.
Well, they're not.
Which is good advice for trying to track down halflings anyway.
Pretty much.
Yeah, the gnomes are very much akin to the traditional concept of a halfling.
Mm.
They live in burrows, like to keep to themselves, except for the ones that have a taste for wandering.
Yep.
They can be a little tricksy. So that is absolutely correct.
Mm.
Okay, so next question in the area of species as well. We mentioned on the previous episode where we reviewed Realms of Terrinoth, that the elves are more divine than arcane. This breaks the typical D&D-esque trope for elves. Is there something based on the existing lore of Terrinoth, or was this a conscious choice? And if the latter, why?
Yes, no, that was very deliberate. That's out of the lore. Elves are, in almost every sense of the word, linked to divine. They literally come from another plane of existence. So, yeah, they're pretty divine. Lowercase d.
Yep, absolutely. That was just drawn directly from the lore and the origins of elves as they exist on Manara.
Very cool. I think it's, as we were talking about, having different ways of looking at the species, having that as a different way from what people might know, but still keeping true to how they're supposed to be and interact with the rest of the world just makes it a little bit different and a little bit unique within this setting. It's very cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Even though they've been exiled, the elves still have that link to the Empyrean and hence the divine skill.
Yeah. Especially with the highborn elves. Right.
So just a question.
Yes, highborn elf, yeah.
Yeah. Because just the elves are so unique in this setting, and again, I've fallen in love with that idea. Just a quick query as well. Who came up with the idea for creating subspecies?
I'm not sure. That's one of those things that came out of discussions we had together about the best way to approach things.
Mm.
And,
yeah.
Because that was something that's been explored in the Star Wars role-playing game with things like, I'm trying to remember one of them now. I can't think off the top of my head.
Nyctos, I think.
What was that?
I think Nyctos have
yes.
species.
So
so we were definitely aware that had worked well before, and it seemed appropriate because while we wanted to explore these varieties of the species, they weren't distinct enough to require entirely separate profiles. But we wanted to differentiate them with some special abilities.
Yeah.
So we talked about it before, heroic abilities. You guys mentioned that it was a bit of a challenge in designing them to make them work and make them fit. Alman Rob asks, were the heroic abilities a conscious effort to substitute the signature abilities that we saw in the Star Wars RPG line to make them more based on the generic nature of the system?
Perhaps not exactly. We actually started with the idea, Katrina especially had the idea that heroes should be beyond everything we have in the basic Genesis player character that defines a character. She wanted them to have a certain special quality that makes them stand out as a hero and someone meant for this sort of unique destiny. And as we developed the idea further, we definitely took inspiration, ideas for how to implement that from signature abilities. And then, of course, because it is a very different system and purpose to some extent, making those work in Genesis, heroic abilities, that is, led to a fair number of distinctions from the signature abilities while having some basic similarities.
Yeah, I think that, like Tim said, a lot of it was the sort of push to make characters here feel a little like Descent characters, where each of them had like a really cool thing they could do. That was not something that really. It was what made them kind of more unique. So yeah, I think what Tim came up with is a really cool way for, even though you have lots of people playing, odds are no one's going to have the same setup for their heroic abilities.
And I guess the big key difference between signature abilities and heroic abilities is your character starts with one of these. Signature abilities in Star Wars, it's a long road to get there. And they're good, but I know in my experience, I very rarely take signature abilities, so I'd rather put my XP into another career tree or something like that. I prefer this system because it gives your character a bit of zest right from the start, which is really, really cool, especially when you're a low level sort of struggling tier character.
It's a good way of defining your character from any other character.
Exactly.
Yeah. Like, why are they a PC in this world when it comes? Like, I know we are play characters, but like, what makes them so unique that you want to tell a story about them?
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it.
Yeah, it makes them those big.
That's exactly it.
Makes them those big action heroes you see on TV and read about, which is great. And there's no reason why you couldn't chuck this in Star Wars.
That is true.
I have both.
Yeah, well, and when you reach those tiers, that 50-point gap, and you sort of level up in a way, and it gives you those having the names, improved or supreme when you do so. That feels good. And was that really something that you wanted as a design goal, having that level up feeling?
Interestingly, I would actually say no to that one.
Okay.
And at some points in the development process, heroic abilities didn't necessarily change or improve as you advanced in experience, or at least not with such regularity. Because, of course, gaining experience points and spending those to increase skills and gain talents is the primary method for character improvement. And although I am really happy with how they ended up and where they do increase along with your character, that the primary goal was, like we're just touching on, to give you that unique heroic quality, whether or not that improved or just explained why you became a hero in the first place.
Yeah, well, and by having it not be a level does sort of achieve that. But it does help you feel like you've reached a goal, a stepping stone every time you hit that point.
You're not actively spending XP either, so it's just ticking away in the background. But you definitely know about it when you hit that threshold because you get so excited because you've gone up on a level. But you're not having to focus your precious XP into it. That's why I really like these abilities, because it just ticks along in the background, and eventually you get there no matter what you decide to do as a career. Which is great, fantastic.
Oh yeah. I'm happy with how they turned out, in that they do represent another way in which your character improves over time, and that's great. That's a source of excitement and a milestone.
Milestone's a good word for it.
Yeah.
Our next question comes from Gerald, and he asks, are there a narrative... when talking about heroic abilities, is there a narrative device as well as mechanical? Do you see the application of heroic abilities in the setting outside of Terrinoth? What, if any, adjustments would you make to fit other settings?
Oh gosh, yes.
There's that excitement we were talking about.
They feel great for superheroes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think really you could just do some minor tweaking, maybe give them more comic book style names, perhaps, something like that. And I think they'd work great.
Absolutely.
Yep, I agree with all that. And I also, like I was just saying, the changes you might make really depend on what setting, what game you're doing. Maybe it is as simple as reflavoring the names. Maybe it's just adding more options. Maybe some of the options don't feel right, need to be replaced. But it can definitely be whatever works best for that game. And I think the trick there, when you're tweaking the rules for your game, would just be keeping in mind what the goal is for that game. Why are heroic abilities a part of it, and what are they? What do you intend for them to do?
Yeah.
Because that's the one thing that I felt with heroic abilities, and it's something that I don't think it's easily missed, but if you're not sort of reading carefully, you may sort of skip it, is that there is that requirement as far as the step process when taking on these heroic abilities, that you give it a narrative flair as well. So you can have two characters with exactly the same heroic ability, but it's completely different.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I think that's hugely important. Is figuring out what the ability represents narratively, and I would recommend even having that in mind before you pick pick the rules. Of course, if one of the rules, one of the primary abilities just really speaks to you, yeah, go with that, and then figure out, okay, but why does my character have this effect on the world? How do they go about accomplishing this?
Yep. Because, I mean, I look at someone like, because I always go back to Marvel superheroes, that if you had somebody like, say, Doctor Strange with, casting a whole heap of magic missiles versus Captain America throwing a shield, it could still be, I think it's Unleashed, which you destroy a minion group. Captain America is throwing a shield. So it's exactly the same ability, but it's just flavored so much differently, and you've named it something.
Hey, look, if I was making Captain America, he would have a signature weapon shield, okay?
Yes, he would too.
So, skills. The skills presented in Realms of Terrinoth provides 4 knowledge skills, namely adventuring, forbidden, geography, and lore. Was it a design goal to have no more than 4 knowledge skills? Was any consideration given to a religion skill? If not, why not?
I guess I'm sorry, go ahead, Tim.
Oh, both at the same time. It was a goal to have a relatively small, manageable number of knowledge skills. I don't know that 4 was necessarily the magic number. That's what we settled on. And I'm sure we considered religion as a skill, but ultimately we decided that it would be very tricky to differentiate that from lore in a fantasy setting. It's difficult to draw that line between other sorts of supernatural, mystical occurrences and religious knowledge when that includes divine magic and divine beings and all that sort of thing. So we decided that would ultimately function better if it was all encompassed in a single skill.
Well, in a world where the divine is made real, what is the line?
True.
Yeah.
And it sort of
that pretty much nails it.
and it keeps down knowledge bloat too, which games can rapidly get.
Yeah.
And what's lore to one person might be religion to another. So it's very subjective in a way.
Because I guess from a mechanical perspective, that's something that's I only thought of right now. Is that if you've set up your character so that they're a non-religious person, and they're asking for a religious check, why can't you throw on a couple of setback die to represent that they don't actually?
If it's something that they don't know,
that's
why not?
Sure, yeah.
But it could also, from a mechanical standpoint, and I've just, as you say, I've just thought of this now. If you're a divine spellcaster, the way the system's set up is that a lot of those skills key off your knowledge. So having it as lore, as the magic thing, as a set.
Yep.
For both arcane and divine.
Makes sense. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
So talking of magic skills, Ben Mitchell asks, what do you feel separates rune magic from regular arcane magic in Terrinoth? I don't mean to criticize the design of rune magic, but it seems inherently weaker as rune stones are rare and necessary for casting without any real advantages over normal arcana. Is there something that I'm missing?
I reckon he is.
I think so too. But we'll let the Tims answer.
Yeah.
That's an interesting question. To the first part of the question about what separates them, and this, I guess, informs the second part of the question.
Yep.
In Terrinoth, since when Timoran created the Orb of the Sky and concentrated so much of the magic in the world that forever made it more difficult for people to access magic directly, making true wizards and sorcerers even rarer. Of course, they still exist, hence we have the Arcana skill included, but we definitely needed to represent that and the importance of the runebound shards that contain magic and allow anyone to access it via those shards. That's a huge part of the setting, so we needed to represent that. And hence having a separate skill and having that rune skill require a runebound shard to function as an implement, unlike other magic skills which don't necessarily need an implement. I don't feel that it's weaker as long as you have access to a runebound shard, obviously. So it is very situational in that sense. But since runebound shards are pretty much universally, they're more potent than other implements. That means they tend to have a high, for those that add damage, it tends to be on the very high end compared to other implements, and many of them add multiple, sometimes very potent qualities without increasing the difficulty of the check. That makes them very powerful implements. Now, true, it might be a weak skill, you could say, if you don't have access to runebound shards yet. But then it's also one of the 2 magic skills that can be accessed through a talent as a career skill after character creation. So it's something your character can learn to use later in the campaign, perhaps once your group discovers a runebound shard and begins experimenting with that.
Or you betray the rune master in the game and take his shard. Just saying.
However you might come across that shard.
That would be a really shardy thing to do.
That was amazing.
Oh, dear. Whew. Tough crowd, Michael.
I laughed. That's all that counts. So,
dear. Because obviously, with each of the shards, it has a section down the bottom of each shard that says that if you use this with the rune skill, you get a bonus. So it's if you don't have a rune, you can't use the rune skill. But if you've got a rune, it's turn up to 11.
Well, and they also have the trigger that anyone can do.
Yeah, true.
Right.
So I don't necessarily agree with Ben, but hey, look, thanks very much for your question, Ben. But yeah, it's.
I hope Ben will explore that skill further in his game. I don't know if he's a player or GM, but I think he'll find if the players get a hold of a runebound shard, or maybe even more than one, the rune skill could suddenly become very potent.
So looking at talents now, were there any talents that you thought were a must-have for this setting? And if so, what was your favorite talent and why?
I kind of like Dungeoneer. I think that's kind of sums up fantasy so much of what we think of it right there.
Yeah, I like that one. I'll piggyback off of the last question and say that the runic lore talent was a must include, because the nature of runebound shards is that anyone can learn to harness their magic, and therefore it was very important that we have a way for characters who didn't begin the game as a magic user to make use of runebound shards to their full extent.
Which kind of sort of brings us to another question as well, that the fact that there are 2 tier 2 talents that add runes, runic lore, and verse bard, but none add arcane, divine, or primal. And was that a design choice again, or is it sort of similar to what you've been talking about as well, Tim, about the fact that, what is the reason for that, I guess?
I would say that the primary reason is that we felt it best represents how magic works in the setting. And for most characters who don't make use of runebound shards, magical ability is something that they were either born with or at least learned to harness very, very early on. And that's why it's so linked to those iconic magic using careers.
Yeah, I think this is things that are coming out of the setting a bit.
Because the setting itself, correct me if I'm wrong, with Genesis, that you can't actually take on any of the magic skills unless you've started it with a career. Is that right?
That's a optional, I believe.
Oh, is it an optional rule? Is it?
So it gives suggestions as to multiple different ways that you can set it up for your campaign. That is one of them.
Okay.
That's correct. And Terrinoth is a prime example of a setting where that approach to magic was appropriate, but it's not required. And in another setting, you could allow anyone to train in a magical skill, regardless of whether or not it's a career skill.
Because there's another skill. I think it's a tier 1 talent that gives access to the divine skill. But for the life of me, I can't recall what it's called.
There is a tier 1 divine talent.
That's it.
Talent that gives you access to the divine skill.
Yep.
But you can only use it once per encounter.
Templar, you're thinking
That's
of?
it. That's the one. Yeah. That could easily be sort of brought across to be an arcane one if you wanted to allow something like that in your own game. But you're limiting it. So you can have like your, elf from first ed D&D, like basic D&D, where your elf was magical.
I think it also comes back to how much magic do you want to have in your game? How important is magic? Is this a setting that's really steeped in magic, or where magic is really rare and hard to find and even harder to use? I think once the group sort of makes that decision for a new setting, that will then they may even want to trim down even on the talents that are in this book. If magic's even more of a really rare thing.
Yep.
I'll have to amend my earlier statement. There are 3 talents then that grant access to a magic skill. I wasn't thinking of Templar. Obviously, it's more limited, so I wasn't including that in my count, of course.
Yep.
One of our listeners has asked, this is Jake RP, has asked about the talent Dissonance, which, in my personal opinion, is a very powerful talent. But when you use the Dissonance talent, can it be used as part of a verse check when casting a spell, or would this be a different action?
It would be a different action because the Dissonance talent is an active talent that requires an action to activate. So you can't combine that with another action.
Yep. Yeah, because that would be so terrifying.
Wow, that's Spinal Tap dial to 11 right there.
That's a talent you and I were looking at the other day.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a bananas talent, that one. That's strumming some hardcore notes to really destroy your opponent.
Yeah. Very metal.
Yes.
Right.
I'm reminded of the bard in Fury Road. Fury Road? Yeah. Yeah.
Never thought a character's a bard, but yeah, that's a great way to
I'm thinking more about
Obviously
a most excellent adventure.
Most excellent adventure? What?
Oh. Yeah.
So, potions and the creation of them was an excellent addition to the rules and was so simple in the implementation, but explosive vials appear to be missing from the list. Could you provide some guidance as to how you would create a bomb using alchemy using the rules presented?
Certainly. So, as you said, that's there aren't any items in the book that are bombs or things like that nature. So that's something that, as a GM, you might allow a player to craft using alchemy. In which case, you might decide to have it function like a weapon, perhaps with the limited ammo quality and the blast quality. Or you might have it function a bit more like the acid vial that's in there, which I believe you can throw. Mm-hmm. So there's a few ways you might approach it. And as a GM, of course, just think about that, discuss it with your player, what they're trying to accomplish, and then decide on an appropriate silver piece value and rarity for the item, which you then use to determine the difficulty for the check to craft it and the cost of the ingredients. But that's a perfect example of using alchemy rules to create something that's not covered in the potions section in the book. I think it's a great idea.
We actually did, I think you did actually, Tim. We created a Dwarven Firebombs for one of the downloadable PC characters on our website.
Yep.
Which would be a good basis if you just want to riff off of that too.
That was the one that Madeline played in the live play.
Yeah, Omala Grimstone has those Dwarven Firebombs, and I think bottle lightning. So those are a great example you might base yours on. If you were to do those in your campaign.
Just as a side note, speaking of terrifying weapons, those acid bombs. Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
Still not as good as distance, though. Just saying.
I gotta say, it was fun actually doing up. Tim wrote most of the rules, and then various writers did the fluffy parts. But I think it's a really fun mix of items in the book. The potions and elixirs. There's just a lot of fun things there.
I absolutely love the whole potion thing, and I think that as far as how that so simple rule of that it's to create them, it's just based on the rarity of the item. And then the GM, if they want to have some very specific elements to those to create, that they have to go out and, research or grind or whatever it is that they have to do. I just thought that was brilliant in its implementation. So well done, guys. That's great.
Oh, glad you enjoyed it. Yeah, I think it's a great opportunity for a small quest to give a player to find that rare component for their super cool potion they're working on.
Absolutely.
And it's a chance for the players to be creative as well.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's what the game's all about.
Yes.
So let's talk the big topic of this book, and generally Genesis as a whole. Let's talk magic. So Richard Buxton asks, the book itself doesn't go too deeply into the way that elven magic works. They draw from the Imperium, but I'm not able to find how this actually functions mechanically. Do they pray to get their wishes? Is it an innate to them that magic flows, and so it's drawing upon their own strength? Is there some wind flowing from the star that they direct their sheer will to? Or is it something else?
I would view it as a more inherent quality, although individual elves might accompany that with prayer or other ritualized components.
Yeah, I think their connection to other planes of reality is just flowing through them.
Right.
Yeah, because there is a description in the book there that talks about them reaching into different spheres and pulling magic and combining it.
Yep.
I wish I could find where that is right now.
Yeah.
I think I know which section you're talking about. Elven magic, probably.
Quite possibly.
Yeah. And the history section, chapter 1, also talks about the origins of elves, and I think that grants some additional insight. But it is magic, and it is ultimately perhaps a bit mysterious and somewhat up to the interpretation of the players and the GM if the book doesn't give them complete answers for how exactly an elf goes about that.
But that just adds to the narrative of the story that you're telling, though. And that's the one thing that I do like about that there are gaps. And even though that one magic is, one arcane user like a wizard is, going to be different from another one, purely based on the narrative rather than the rules themselves. And I think that's something that some people, just that I've been talking to, get a little bit hung up on, is that there is that narrative which goes along with the skill check.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like I said, perhaps different elves might go about it very differently, and even though ultimately it's based on their inherent connection to the Empyrean, they might have different cultural or personal approaches that flavor how that happens.
Yeah.
So yeah, it does. I did find where it was. It is under Elven Magic on page 127 and 128, specifically under the spheres combined, where it talks about drawing from different light and air in order to create a certain effect, which is pretty cool.
Cool.
Awesome. Now, Chase Lemaster asks us a question. It's quite a short one, simple. How does necromancy work? Specifically, how would you raise a skeleton to fight for you?
Are we talking narratively or mechanically?
Well.
Bit of both.
Both. Well, so in Terrinoth specifically, necromancy is sort of unique. It's very, very difficult, and only Wykar is a true, perhaps, necromancer, as people might envision it in terms of being able to raise the dead. But other necromancers who serve him can make use of the bone dust of slain reanimates. So narratively, you need that component in Terrinoth, some bone dust, which you add to the corpse to revive it. And mechanically, I would use the conjure magic action. But then, as with many spells, there's going to be a narrative component that will vary. In this case, you will need to have not just the bone dust, but a corpse to work with. Otherwise, it wouldn't be raising a skeleton. Although it might be something mechanically similar in the rules, such as manifesting a spectral skeleton that can still fight. So there's different approaches you might take.
Yeah, I think that's one of the cool things. There are, I mean, you say, oh, there's necromancers. Everybody knows what necromancers do. They sort of wave their wand and the dead come back to life. Things are a little different in Terrinoth. It's a little harder. You've got to have sort of the bone dust or parts of an ex reanimate of some sort, and the older it is, the better. Which again, it's just a cool little tweak, sort of like how elves are also a little different from quote unquote regular elves in this setting.
I guess how the GM handles that loosely or how tightly comes down to the game, I suppose. If you want to raise that skeleton, you haven't got the appropriate bone dust, the GM will be like, well, you have to get some bone dust, and if not, then
time.
it's like the old what should call it, the bag for that wizards have in D&D.
Spell component pouch.
Spell component pouch. Some GMs are like, yeah, you need that with your proper components, and others don't even care. So it's interesting. It comes down to who's running the game.
I always make them have it.
Yeah, you're that sort of guy.
Well, no, because it's narratively important, especially like most of the time it doesn't matter.
Exactly.
Yeah. But you put them in a prison cell and you take away the component pouch, and then they've got to come up with creative ways to achieve things.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a great example of how, just like any other part of the game, the magic rules are going to be tied into the narrative and reflecting what's going on in the story, and as well as influencing the story, of course. So there's no real way to completely disentangle those.
So we've got a question here from Richard Buxton regarding the teleportation rune. Do you have any suggestions on implementing teleportation as an actual spell? Would you modify one of the existing spells, or would you make a talent with effects similar to the rune? It's an interesting question, because I know in this setting as well, they have like rune gates and things like that you can teleport around the place.
Yeah, that's something we really went into. It sounds like augment to me. Tim?
Yeah, I would say once again, it might depend on what's best for your game. I could see different approaches to it, but my gut would be to use the augment spell in a more narrative way.
Because there seems to be... Sorry, Tim.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
There just seems to be a bit of a debate as to how to handle that, and I mean that's something which I think is exciting about the system. I don't think it's a bad thing at all. That there are so many different ways that the same thing can be achieved. And augment's one. I know that we've discussed it before, and we've talked about, conjure, that you're basically conjuring a door from one point to the next with range increment thrown in and whatever
The
else.
reverse of conjuring something to you.
Sure.
Yeah, I love that. That's very cool.
I think it would be fun if there were different ways to do it, and each had a different set of narrative dice spending results. What technique or what... Are you augmenting yourself? Are you conjuring portal doors? Are you somehow emulating a teleportation rune? And each one will have possible benefits and drawbacks.
That's an idea for a really unique way to teleport. It could go under a feral ability. I'm not sure.
Right.
Primal, sorry, not feral. When you teleport, you don't go to a specific location. You teleport to someone and take over their existence.
Wow.
Oh, I like that.
Drop
That sounds
their-
awesome.
Drop their body in your body, and
Or you substitute, like they move to your location, you move to theirs.
Or you just take control there. Your soul jumps into their soul, so you ride them.
Is this like
Sounds nice.
is this like a tree walk but a body walk
Yeah.
as well?
Oh, that sounds awfully necromantic to me.
Yeah, that sounds.
Oh dear.
That's basically how we have to do how our internet in Australia works.
It'd be faster.
This is true. This is very true.
Classic.
So our next question comes from listener G Tokyo Time, and this is about runes. He goes, new to this lovely system. We spent decades playing wizards, bards, and druids. Please help me sell my players on runic casting. Besides the fantastic flavor possibilities, what are the benefits that outweigh some of the glaring detriments?
Glaring detriments. I don't agree, but anyway.
I can't see the point. Sort of like, it is tied into an object. But I think that actually offers lots of great adventure ideas if something happens to that object. And just merely having it, if word gets around, you've got one of these things. Suddenly, you, in many circumstances, might have been painting a big bullseye on your back.
But it's like,
Again, I think that there's a lot of great stories that can come out of that.
yeah, because there's obviously the whole search for the MacGuffin sort of story that we all know and love. That you've got a whole range of them that you can throw into your story.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you've got a teleportation rune, that's a big advantage.
Right, so Archellus says, using the rune skill, one must use a rune as an implement. Yes, we understand that. Are there any limits to the magic action associated with the rune? For example, could an arcane rune be used to curse, or a wanderer's stone used to attack?
Yes. The only limit is the actions available for the rune skill.
Yep.
So, actually, I think this can also help us answer that previous question a little more in detail. One of the great things about the rune system is that you really have a great reason to come up with these cool, unique narrative descriptions for what you're doing. Like if you use a teleport rune to attack someone, what is that? Are you teleporting a boulder up above them? Are you teleporting them into an object? If you're using what's another good rune? The Wanderer rune. How do you explain that? That's a great opportunity to, as a player and working with the rest of the group, to come up with really cool magical effects that you might never have thought about otherwise.
I love the idea of a teleportation rune sort of becoming the Wile E. Coyote.
That's exactly where my brain went.
Putting boulders above people's heads.
That's amazing.
It's the Acme. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, if you use an ice storm rune to curse someone, maybe they're half frozen in ice, and that's why they're having so much trouble accomplishing anything. So there's really just anything you can think of to explain. How exactly is this rune having this effect mechanically?
I just think that people aren't necessarily reading the rune magic as closely, maybe to give it a few more reads.
When
That's the problem. They're listening to the words.
I
This
think
book is silent.
Is this true?
Says the guy who can't read.
I think they're just looking at the fact
That's how Michael reads. He listens to the words and looks at the pictures.
Works good.
I think that they're just looking at the fact that you have a magic skill and you can do these magic actions. They're not looking at the fact that the implements themselves are more powerful than your normal implements.
Yeah.
They may be rarer and you may not be able to perform your magic without it, but there is more effects that can be achieved.
Yeah.
It's like there's pros and cons.
Yeah.
Weird. Weird.
But it is a different sort of approach to magic for a lot of players. So yeah, I would recommend take some time and read those sections and think about what that means for the narrative of your game.
All right, so what was the process of choosing what creatures appeared in the book? And can you comment on why? Because now we're moving over into the creatures and NPCs section, which there was a lot of NPCs.
Yes. I think a lot of it was just discussion amongst us, what things, people's, creatures, whatnot, were kind of like iconic to a setting that we wanted to have as part of it to help sort of bring that setting to life, and obviously to give interesting things for PCs to encounter and GMs that they would want to like, oh, this is cool. Yes, I'll use that.
Yeah, and getting in some variety. Not all horrible monsters that want to kill you, but having various NPCs that you might interact with on more friendly terms, or maybe they're a social adversary of some kind, opposed to your interests. So,
because I guess you also had to take into consideration the generic nature of the book as well. That it had to be monsters that you could use in any sort of setting, even if it was reskinned and stuff like that. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, like a spined thresher could obviously be just some sort of a big, bad, nasty creature in almost any kind of a fantasy setting.
Oh yeah, definitely don't underestimate how much mileage you can get out of the NPCs by a little, like you said, reskinning or changing the narrative of what they are and what their abilities represent.
Can I just throw a question in here that we hadn't planned? Just,
sure.
What are your favorite monsters in this book?
Ooh, strictly monsters or just NPCs?
Oh, NPCs as well, yeah.
I gotta say, for me, some of the ones we just sort of like spitballed around ideas for and thought, boy, this would be cool. And I'm trying to find it. Yes, the Sword Poet. That was one. The more we thought about lore more, because I had a lot of fun fleshing that out. Just things. What other things we could put in that area, and just the Circus of Blades, and that all just sort of came out of one afternoon's discussion in the office.
Because that sort of had very much, correct me if I'm wrong, because I haven't got the book in front of me, but it's more about, it's kind of like an Oriental feel. Is that right?
I was thinking more, well, sure, yes. That could be, I was thinking more European, almost a Cyrano kind of character.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, whatever. I mean, I think that's actually really cool if multiple people look at this and each feels, oh, yes, it's obviously this.
Yeah.
I would say mission accomplished in that case.
Yeah, good job.
I'm very partial to the Myriad because a shark creature with octopus pinnacles coming out of its face is just so horrifying and crazy. I love that.
I think there were some creatures from the Descent and Runebound games that, for me at least, felt so iconic. So yeah, we got to make sure we have space for them in this book.
Yeah.
They were very unique to this setting.
Yep.
Now, Leon Powell asks, of all the very cool creatures included in the book, was there any that you regret leaving out? Because I'm assuming you had to leave some out.
We could talk for another 3 hours on all this stuff. Yeah, that's always the hardest part, is just what will fit and what, sorry, didn't make the cut. Maybe next time, or maybe, like telling an actor they didn't make it into this film, but or a Broadway. Yeah, it's hard. There's so many things that would have been fun to put into this book.
Yeah.
There's some blue dragon somewhere sitting in his little apartment in Hollywood, smoking a cigarette. Yeah. One shot.
Yeah. No, it is tough. I mean, Descent and Runebound and all those other games have so many years of so many wonderful things they've created, and if you're feeling there should be more to this setting, I encourage you to play Descent and Runebound and all those other games, and you can get to them.
Yep.
You'll have a blast.
Well, Descent and Runebound and whatnot have all those extra creatures and their equivalent stat cards.
Yeah.
So you can look at those stat cards and do a bit of comparison to what exists in Genesis now. Okay, this is how this would probably translate to Genesis, and create yourself. If you do create,
we even
yourself,
have a nice little section in a book that tells you how to make new NPCs up. So,
crazy.
Yeah.
Funny that. And if you do make something like that, please share it.
Yeah, absolutely. Put it up on the...
Yes.
Yeah, that'd
Post
be cool.
Online. Share it with your friends. You bet.
So the dragon is an iconic creature in many fantasy settings, and the various dragons presented in Realms of Terrinoth were both amazing and scary. What are some of the design challenges when designing these types of creatures for the game?
That's a good question. I think the main challenge is keeping them appropriately scary, while also represent them in a way that at least more experienced characters have a chance of dealing with in one way or another, whether that's through fighting it directly or whether they outsmart it or run away. But giving them the right sort of majesty and power without making them overly complex or having such perhaps a high wound threshold that a fight is just not something that can be resolved in a reasonable amount of time. So that sort of thing, really. Keeping them working well within the bounds of the game while feeling like a proper dragon.
Yeah, particularly when you've got that kind of character and monster on the cover of the book, you kind of have like a really high expectation of what it's going to be like and how it's going to play.
Yeah.
And I'm a huge dragon fan, so I will admit the first thing I did was when I saw that was looked straight to go to the dragon sections to see what I could find. So it was awesome. I'm very happy.
Good.
For this game, making the dragons sort of universally feel cool, but also feel like they're definitely the dragons in the Terrinoth setting, which are a little different. I mean, I was listening to y'all's last podcast talking about the ancient dragons. Like, it definitely feels a little different. And then all of the other ones have their own little difference to make them each feel a little unique. And some are definitely a heck of a lot harder to encounter than others. But I think you'll get some fun stuff out of all of them.
And I think it certainly gives you some framework, even if you want to design your own dragons with additional stuff. Like if your characters are, upwards of 500 XP or, 1,000 XP or whatever else, and you're wanting to design really big sort of end game sort of monsters that, it's such a simple system that you can just go, right, well, he's going to have 6 in his strength instead, so that it's sort of comparable to the hill giant or whatever it is. There's a giant in the book. I can't remember what his name is. It's simple to do those sorts of things and add on. So, yeah.
The Tims can correct me if I'm wrong here, but if you are designing your own creatures for Terrinoth, go through and look at what already exists in the book. And there's obviously a design goal that's been implemented in the creation of these creatures. Like, there's no creatures with breach, for example. That would mean we couldn't find any creatures with breach, correct, Martin? There's nothing in there?
Not that I could see, but...
Yeah. So if you design your own creature, it might be tantalizing to give them breach. But in this setting in particular, breach would be very powerful. So look what's been created and how they've designed the creatures and create within the realms of that.
Can you imagine a dragon with breach on its claws? Holy dooly.
It would be...
I would see a dragon.
Actually,
we
do have a breach creature in the book.
Oh, there is?
There is.
Okay.
The Wraith on 167.
Yeah, that makes sense for
That makes a lot of sense, yeah,
All
absolutely.
right, ignore everything I've said because I'm quite clearly wrong.
No, but I mean, for a wraith...
The point still stands.
Yeah.
You should... well, it's not to say don't include a quality or an ability just because it's not already in there. It's certainly something to think about. What does this do to the game and to the encounter, and is it going to be too much for the players to overcome with their capabilities, or perhaps it's appropriately terrifying for your dragon to be able to just pierce right through their armor.
Yeah.
Well, giving that one creature breach sort of makes that Wraith stand out amongst all the rest.
Yeah.
It makes it pop, I guess you could say, which is interesting as well. It's cool.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's really definitely always the aspiration to have creatures feel unique and memorable in some way or another.
Yep. Because one of the things that, and this isn't sort of in our questions, this is more sort of a statement more than anything else. One of the things that I've picked up from, to use another system, L5R, where they have the monsters in the back and then they have their templates, that I don't think it would be too hard if people want to double, triple, whatever the number of monsters that they have in the book, is to create a template that you can just pony onto the top of an existing monster that you've seen to give it that additional sort of feel.
Skeleton dragon?
Skeleton dragon. There you go.
Yeah, that's a great idea, having like a basic template for various things and for your game, And then just, well, I need variation on this. Well, I've got this. I'll just add some new things to it. Boom.
Yeah, definitely. Don't feel don't be afraid to customize creatures for particular games or encounters. Dragons are a great example because they are such powerful individual nemesis that that's a great one to consider adding an extra quality or tweaking the numbers slightly to make it a particular dragon who features in your campaign.
And that's the sort of thing that you can sort of do almost on the fly if you need to, because of the flexibility of the system. But yeah. So our final thoughts on the Realm of Terrinoth book itself, and more so for you guys more than anything else, is that if you could offer advice to any game master to help them be better at what they do, what would that advice be?
I'll go first. I think communication. It's one of those things that I think probably every roleplay game mentions, but I don't think we can mention it enough. And talk to your players. Players talk to your GM. Make sure before you start, obviously, everyone is on board for it's going to be this type of game, and maybe even like we're going to run it for this long. There's a set duration, but that everybody, this is a game we're all signed up for. And then periodically check back with them. Is everyone still having a good time? Are there things that you want to try? Do you want to inject some plot ideas? It's very easy for a GM to feel everything's going well and the players are growing bored or frustrated. So everyone needs to feel that they're part of a joint game, and which should be fun. And everyone should be contributing to this sort of joint story we're all telling. And also, just don't stress it. This is supposed to be fun. You got to do some little work. Have fun doing it.
Yep.
And if you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong.
I agree. Absolutely.
Oh, that's a great answer. Communication is important, and I was going to say relax and enjoy it. So to give my own answer, then I'll say play a game or run a game rather as GM that you want to run, and that the players want to play. That is going to be the biggest thing. If you run something just because you think that's what the players want, but perhaps your heart's not really in it, that's not going to be as enjoyable for anyone as it would be if you were really running a game that you wanted to play, again, assuming the players are on board as well. So that does go back to communication, but I think that's an important thing to keep in mind.
Yeah.
So follow the heart.
Follow the heart.
Follow the heart. Trust your heart.
That's beautiful.
Oh dear, but no. So now because we've covered so many questions, listeners, and we will be skipping behind the screens for this episode. But if you have any more questions regarding Terrinoth or anything RPG related in general, be sure to send them in so that we can answer them in future episodes. Just send it through to info@thedicepoolpodcast.com, or you can go to our website at thedicepoolpodcast.com to fill in our form. And you can also obviously send your questions through to the guys at FFG directly, and they have there's a number of community members that any questions that they do ask, they put up in a specific thread, which is really kind of helpful as well. So definitely go to the FFG forums website for that. What is the email that they can send questions to you guys?
Oh, you're asking so many hard questions.
This is hard journalism.
I believe if you go to fantasyflightgames.com, there should be a contact page that will have a submission form for rules questions.
Cool.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So,
but I mean, ask on forums. It's very possible someone else had the same question, and either the group there already sort of hashed it out, or at least gave a lot of good responses, and you can pick one of those that feels best for your game and your campaign and go with it.
Absolutely. I know that that's what we try to encourage our listeners to do as well, is obviously jump on our Facebook or Twitter or any of our social media platforms and ask the question. There's only one dumb question, and that's the unasked one. So, as you say, if somebody has a question, no doubt about 10 other people have asked the same question, but they're afraid to ask. So, be the one to pony up and definitely go and ask.
I don't know about that statement.
Absolutely.
What?
Have you seen like the Yahoo Ask Me Questions thing? There's some pretty dumb questions out there.
I have not seen a dumb question on our forums.
No. Look up some Yahoo questions.
Questions are great. I mean, even if and hopefully they're brand new and fresh, they often make us look at something and say, wow, I really hadn't thought of that way of thinking of this before, but somebody did. And let's think about this. This is a really good question. It's making us like re-examine the first principles maybe of something.
Yep.
There's no dumb questions when it comes to Genesis. Is that more accurate?
There we go.
Very good. So that kind of brings us to the end of those questions. So a big thank you to Tim Cox and Tim Hucklebery for sharing the time to spend with us and answer all of these questions that we've had as well as our listeners have had. So it's been an absolute delight picking both of your brains on this fantastic book. And if you haven't got it, please go out and get it. You will not regret it at all.
Yes. Thanks, Tims, for coming on.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone here. And big thanks, obviously, to everybody listening and playing. It's great seeing this sort of new system taking off so well, and everyone's really excited about it. I can't say it enough, but I just say it every podcast. Thank you for allowing us to have really cool jobs.
Yeah.
I can tell with that.
Everything Huck said. Thank you for having us on. It was a pleasure, and it's always great to hear and to know that so many people are out there playing the game and reading the book and thinking about it and asking these questions of themselves and discussing it with each other. So keep it up.
Very good.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Awesome.
And keep watching the website.
Future announcements. Exactly right.
Had to get that in there one more time.
Well, that was a really exciting discussion with the guys. Very entertaining.
Well, you know what they say about double Tims? There's two of them.
They do say that.
They do. It's quite a common phrase. I've seen it on many a bumper sticker.
Is that a thing? Okay. Right.
Yeah, it really is. Haven't you seen that?
I have not.
Yeah.
No.
What?
No. What?
Are you even Australian?
Apparently, yes. Oh, I've never seen that.
Oh, I think it's more commonplace in your big boomers. Just
Yeah.
look at that. I guarantee now we've said it. Everywhere you're going to go, you're going to see double Tim on number plates, the bumper sticker.
Okay.
That's how you know when it's really good. Like, did you have a good time? Yeah, it was a double Tim. Good double Tim.
Wow. I've never seen that, ever. I think you people are having a go at me.
We're not. It's a thing.
It's a thing.
Right.
Have you seen any in California? I can't imagine you would have.
No, I haven't seen it. That's the downside of California. It's not enough double Tim.
Not enough double Tim. Interesting.
No.
All right. Well, I think that's a wrap, guys. So thanks again to the Tims for coming along, and thanks for listening to our episode. Look forward to the next one. So I'm GM Hooly.
I am GM Huzz.
I'm GM Flano.
And I'm GM Kaitlin.
And together we are the Dice Pool Podcast, where adventure is just a roll away. The Dice Pool Podcast is a proud member of the D20 Radio Network. For more information about the network, visit www.d20radio.com. The Dice Pool Podcast is a fan-generated podcast. All of the information provided on the podcast and related website are not affiliated with Fantasy Flight Games or any of their licensors. The content of this podcast remains the property of the Dice Pool Podcast and is intended for educational and informational purposes only. The Genesis role-playing game, the Genesis logo, content, and all material remain the property of Fantasy Flight Games.